Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be ranking all of the mages based on their current power level, so placing them in a tier, whether it be S tier, which is very strong, A tier, which is good, B tier being okay, and then C tier is garbage. So with that being said, guys, let's just get right into it. So first off here for Ahri, we're going to be placing her in A tier. So when I think of Ahri right now, she's not really a champion I see too often, but when I see her, she tends to do pretty well. Like, she's not a champion I really think is too overpowered at the moment. When I think of Ahri, when I play against her, I don't think of an unfair champion. She feels pretty fair to play against, feels pretty fair to play as, so I feel like she's a solid A tier pick. Nothing special, but she's also not very weak at the moment. And then next up here for Anivia, I'm going to be placing her in the A tier as well. So a pretty underrated mid lane pick in my opinion at the moment. Can do pretty well into a lot of assassin mid lane picks once you get to your Zhonya's and you got your Egg as well. If you're playing against a Zed, an Echo, Katarina, any of these dive champions, you can do pretty well against them once you do hit the mid to late game. But that's the main issue with Anivia, is that you don't really come online until you hit the mid game. So you're scaling with your tier, with your Rod of Ages. If Anivia had a better early game, she could potentially be like an S tier mid lane champion, but the fact that her early game is extremely weak, it does kind of hold her back a little bit. And then for Annie here, she's going to be the first champion placed in the S tier. So Annie's so underrated at the moment. She got a couple buffs a while back, I think it was 3 or 4 patches ago, and it just tipped her over the edge into S tier. I don't know why more people aren't playing her at the moment. It's probably just because she's a pretty boring champion. Nobody really wants to play Annie, but if you're really looking to climb right now, she's such a great pick. She does especially well into champions like Yasuo and Yone. Those are 2 of the most played champions right now in the lower elos, and Annie has upwards of a 58% win rate against those picks at the moment. So it's just absolutely insane. If you're looking for some freelo in this patch and you're in the lower elos, then pick up Annie for sure. So Aurelion Sol is going to be the next one up here, and Aurelion Sol, I'm going to place him in A tier as well. I feel like Aurelion Sol is a very forgotten champion. Nobody really plays him in solo queue, one of the lowest pick rates for any mid laner right now, but I still feel like if you can play a good Aurelion Sol, you can have some pretty good impact in solo queue. You still have the great roaming potential with this champion. He can just impact the map extremely well early on in the game, so not a pick that I would really recommend playing. Like, I definitely, if you want to pick up Aurelion Sol, I definitely recommend like one tricking it or spending a lot of time on the champion, but he's an overall pretty solid mid lane pick at the moment. So moving on to Azir now, he's going to be the first champion placed in C tier. So unless you're a one trick on this champion, unless you want to spend a ton of games, hundreds and hundreds of games on this pick, he's just not worth it to pick up in solo queue. If your main goal is to climb and you want to climb relatively quickly, then just stay away from Azir. He takes way more skill than the average mid lane champion to be able to play him at a good level. So that's the reason to why I do have him down in C tier. Now for Brand, I'm going to be placing him in the A tier. This is for support Brand, by the way. If this were for mid Brand, he'd be in like B or C tier, but for support Brand, I think he's a pretty good pick at the moment. He's not too insane. He's not like super OP, but I do think that he does have really good carry potential, has a very good laning phase, really good team fight, and he just relies a lot less on his AD carry and on his team to be able to carry him. I think that he has a lot of solo carry threat, which does make him a great pick for solo queue. So next up here for Cassiopeia, she's going to be another champion placed in the A tier. So Cassiopeia was a little bit stronger earlier on in the season. I still think she is one of the better carry mid picks, but reason why I don't have her in S tier at the moment is because I just think her matchups, especially the past couple patches, have gotten a little bit weaker. We saw Zed get buffed a couple patches back. We just saw Kali get buffed in this patch, and these really mobile assassin picks that can like one-shot you, burst you out really easily, she does tend to struggle against in solo queue. So I just don't think she's the most blind pickable mid lane champion at the moment, so that's why I do have her in A tier instead of S tier. So making our way down now, it looks like the next champion here is going to be Fiddlesticks. I don't really know if he's classified exactly as a mage, but we're just going to rank him in this video anyway. So Fiddlesticks right now, S tier jungle pick, really strong. I think that ever since his rework, he's been one of the best jungle picks in the game. He's just so good, especially for the lower ranks, because players don't really play around his ultimate. His ultimate is just so strong. It gets to a pretty short cooldown. You run Ultimate Hunter on this champion, you get CDR, becomes a pretty short cooldown in the mid game. So you constantly just play around that ultimate, has an extremely good team fight, and you just solo carry games because of that on this champion. And then for Galio, he's pretty much a mix of an assassin, a tank, a mage. Like, I don't even know what you'd actually categorize him as, but we're gonna rate him in this video, and he's gonna be placed in the S tier. So right now, Galio is the best blind pick mid in the game, in my opinion. He's just so strong. He does pretty well into most matchups, even in more difficult matchups. You just sit back, farm with your Q very easily. Got great roaming potential, really good skirmish, great team fight. So there's not a lot to not like about this champion. And then for Heimerdinger, he's going to be placed in the A tier. So I think whether it be top, mid, or bot lane, Heimerdinger's an A tier pick in all three of those roles. He's just a very undervalued pick in my opinion. He's got a very strong laning phase. You can pick him into almost any matchup. He can do very well into a lot of different things. He's got a pretty decent mid to late game as well. So I know he was nerfed recently, like in the past couple months, which did kind of drop him out of popularity, but I still think he's a pretty good pick, which is why he's in the A tier. So the next mage up here, it looks like it's going to be another champion that you could say is a mage or an enchanter, but we're just going to rank her for this video anyways, and Karma is going to be placed in the B tier. So for support Karma, she did receive some nerfs a couple patches ago, and that did bring her down in power quite a bit. She's definitely one of the weaker supports in the game right now, so she's going to be placed in the B tier. I could honestly place her in C tier as well, like she's somewhere in between like B or C tier, but I'll give her the benefit of the doubt and I'll place her in the B tier. Next for Karthus, one of the better jungle champions in the game right now, so he's going to be placed in S tier. He got buffed a couple patches back, and ever since those buffs, he's been one of the best junglers in the game. He's just got such a good mid to late game. Press R to win once you get a couple items with Karthus, and you're going to find yourself solo carrying games with this champion. So next here for Kennen, this is a champion that I haven't seen in solo queue really much at all in season 10. I'm going to place him in the B tier right now. I just feel like he is one of the relatively weaker top lane picks. When you take a look at the top lane meta at the moment, you've got a lot of these like dive fighter top lane champions like Camille, Jax, Aurelia, Renekton, Fiora, and he just really struggles into those kind of picks. Any champion that can just gap close right on top of him, and he can't really kite them out super easily with his E, he does tend to struggle against, and because we're seeing a lot of those in the meta right now, I just don't really think he's the greatest top lane pick. And then next year for LeBlanc, she is going to be placed in the B tier as well. I just feel like LeBlanc is such a feast or famine champion at the moment, because if you don't get rolling on her in the early game, if you don't get a really good snowball going, she's just so much weaker than most other mid lane picks. And because there's so many champions now, it feels like that can really just nullify her early game. Her early game's not even that great. If you're going up against a champion like Kassadin or going up against Galio, who are two of the strongest mid lane picks at the moment, you just don't even have that great of an early game, and you can't even really snowball in those matchups. So it just feels like the champion isn't really worth playing over a lot of other mid lane picks. And then for Lissandra, she's in between like A or B tier for me right now, but I'm going to place her in the A tier here. I think she's a pretty good pick into a lot of meta assassin mid lane picks. She can do pretty well. Once she gets Zhonya's, she's got her ultimate at really negating a lot of those champions all-in threats, and especially once you reach the mid to late game, like just pressing R on that dive champion trying to jump onto you or your backline, pressing R on a Katarina or a LeBlanc or a Fizz can just completely nullify them. So I think that she's a pretty decent pick right now. She's not overwhelming by any means. She's definitely not a very strong pick, but she is a pretty good mid lane pick. For Lux, it really depends on where you're playing her and who you're playing her with as to where she's placed on the tier list right now. If you're playing her with Sona and you're playing her the Lux Sona combo, she's like S++ tier right now. She's absolutely disgusting. But if you're just playing her normally without Sona, just in the support role or in the mid role, I think she's a pretty decent A tier pick right now. And then next year for Malzahar, he's also going to be placed in the A tier, so very obvious strengths and weaknesses to this champion. His early game is extremely weak. He doesn't get prio in most matchups. He doesn't have the ability to trade very well early on, but if you can get to your mid to late game on Malzahar, super impactful mid lane champion. Press R to win with your ultimate. Multi-man silences in team fights can be extremely good, so you just got to get past that early game in order to make this champion work. And then for Morgana, I think she's one of the better support picks in the game right now. We just saw Nautilus, Bard, Karma get nerfed in the previous patches. She actually got buffed in this previous patch, so I think that she's actually an S tier support pick right now. I do think she does pretty well into most of the meta support. She does very well into the nerf Nautilus, does very well into Thresh, Blitzcrank, who are played a lot at the moment, so I do think Morg is one of the better supports for solo queue. And then for Nico, she also just got buffed in this patch, and I'm going to be placing her in the A tier. So I think she's super underrated, especially against a lot of really annoying mid lane picks. If you're having difficulty against Zoe, Akali, Echo, Fizz, she does very well into those types of champions. So a pick that would be worthwhile to look into if you're looking for a new mid lane champion. And then for Orianna here, it feels like she's always just a staple in the A tier. No matter what the meta is, Orianna's always going to be a good mid lane pick. So if you're somebody who's just looking to pick up a champion, add them to your pool, and just always have them in your champion pool, always be a good pick for you to play in solo queue, then Orianna would honestly be one of my top 3 picks for sure. Now for Rumble, I'm going to be placing him in the A tier right now. If this were for top lane Rumble, he'd be B tier, mid lane Rumble is A tier, but because he is a little bit better mid and because I think he's played slightly more in the mid lane at the moment, we're going to be placing him in the A tier. So I think Rumble, he definitely isn't as strong as he was like a couple months ago. There was a point to where Rumble was like S+ tier mid laner, but he ended up getting some nerfs to his shield. His shield used to be like 100 shielding, now it's down to 60, so he's definitely a little bit more abusable in the early game. His early game isn't as broken as it was before, but you still do have a very strong early game, very good early shove, very good roaming potential with this champion, so I think that he's a great pick for solo queue because of that. And then for Ryze, we're gonna throw him right down into the C tier here with his buddy Azir. I think that Ryze, if you can play him at a good level, he is a little bit better than Azir. Like if you can really play this champion to his limits, then I think that he could be like B or A tier at the moment, but just for your average solo queue champion, he's not worth it to pick up. Your micro needs to be really strong on this champion in order to make him worth it. Like being a short range mage, you can be punished so easily just for misstepping or mispositioning in a team fight and just die immediately. So he is down in the C tier because I think that there's just so many other better picks than him at the moment. All right, moving on to Swain now. Swain support, really good pick right now. He got buffed a couple patches back. He is going to be placed in the S tier here. He's just such a good carry support pick. I think if there's just one support right now, I'd recommend you pick up if you want to carry from that role, it would be Swain. And even for like mid, top, and even AD carry Swain, I think he's really good at the moment too. He's like A/S tier in every single role in the game right now. So if you just want to play a champion who can be flexed into multiple roles, who's a very strong pick, then Swain is very worthwhile to pick up. Next here for Syndra, she's going to be joining Azir and Ryze down in the C tier. So this champion was like a couple months back in like the A or S tier, but she received 3 different nerfs over the past few patches. She got a nerf to her E a while back, increasing the cooldown. Her Q got a mana cost increase, and then it also got a damage decrease recently. So those 3 nerfs combined just really hurt Syndra for solo queue, and like the Azir and Ryze, she's just totally outclassed right now by many other mid lane picks. Now for Taliyah, you don't really see this champion very often at all recently. I'm going to place her in A tier though. I think that she is still a pretty strong pick. If you play her in the bot lane, the mid lane, or in the jungle, you can make her work right now. A very underrated pick. You can definitely surprise your opponents with this champion because they probably haven't seen her in a while. They don't really know exactly what she can do and the limits to the champion. So if you can play a good Taliyah, also because of her really strong roaming potential, she can be a great pick for solo queue. For Twisted Fate, he did end up getting a nerf to his W a couple patches back, and he was S tier before that, but since he got that nerf and increasing the cooldown on his W in the earlier ranks, it has dropped him down into A tier. And then for Veigar, he is going to be placed in the A tier, so just a super good scaling mid lane champion, really good once you hit a couple items, but his early game is still very weak, and he can be punished very easily in the early game by a lot of mid lane champions, so that's why he is in the A tier and not in the S tier. And then for Vel'Koz, one of my favorite mage champions in the game, he's going to be placed in the A tier. I think he's very underrated for both the mid and the support role. He does very well into a lot of other mage picks like the Annie, the Galio, the Cassiopeia, Anivia, Nico, just any of these short range mages he does so well into. Reason why he's not S tier though is that he absolutely gets dumped on by really any assassin pick that does have mobility because he doesn't have a gap closer and he is very skill shot reliant. And then for Victor, things were looking pretty good for Victor for a while. The meta was not too bad for him, and he was like an A/B tier pick in these past couple of months. But right now, I just think he's a B tier pick. With the way the mid lane meta has shifted recently, we're seeing a lot more Akali right now in this patch after her buffs. We're seeing a lot of Zed after his buffs, and those assassin picks just tend to do very well into Victor. And I just don't think he's got the most favorable matchups right now, which is why he is in the B tier. And then for Vladimir, despite the community's perception of this champion as being like super broken, just super OP, in my opinion, he's an A tier pick right now. I think Vladimir, yes, once you get a couple items on him, once you hit the mid to late game, he's absolutely insane, but his early game is definitely punishable. He does have a very weak early game, very weak laning phase. He doesn't have a very good skirmish at all early on, so you can definitely look to punish him there. And for that reason, I just don't think he's an S tier pick. And then for Xerath, very similar to Victor, he's going to be placed in the B tier here, pretty much for the same reason. He's got a pretty weak early game. You need a couple items on this champion to come online, and he does very poorly into a lot of these very strong early game assassin picks. So he just doesn't really fit into the meta right now for those reasons. For Ziggs, I'm going to be placing him in the B tier as well for pretty much the exact same reasons there as Victor and Xerath. For Zilean, you guys might be a little bit surprised about this placement here, but he is the most underrated champion in the game in my opinion right now, especially for the mid lane and how the meta is shaping out. He's going to be placed in the S tier. I think this champion is just so good right now. Does super good into things like Zed, Yasuo, Yone, Akali, Katarina, like any champion that wants to dive on top of your team, burst out a champion. He does so well into them. Even support Zilean right now is a really good pick too. He's got a pretty underrated laning phase, scales extremely well into the mid to late game. So if you're just somebody who likes to pick up the more undervalued champions or likes to play the underrated picks, Zilean is, in my opinion, the most underrated mage in the game right now. And then for Zoe, she has actually gotten indirectly weaker over the past few patches. With Yone being released, he's pretty good into her. With Yasuo, Zed, Fizz being played a ton, she doesn't have the best matchups at the moment, but I am still going to place her in A tier. She's not the best blind pick mid, but if you can play her in good matchups, or if you can just get some good RNG in the laning phase, pick up some good summoner spells, like your early game can still be very strong on Zoe. You can still have insanely good carry potential with your pick from your bubble and your one-shot potential, so I still do think she is a good mid lane pick. And then for Zyra here to round it out, she is going to be placed in the A tier, so very similar to Brand, just a great carry support pick. You rely a lot less on your team when playing a champion like Zyra or Brand because you can find picks, you can deal a lot of damage with this champion, your team fight is absolutely insane, so a great pick for solo queue. Alright, so that is going to be all for the video, guys. Hopefully I didn't miss any mages. If there's a certain champion that could be classified as a mage but could also be classified as something else, then I might have not rated them in this video, but hopefully I did rate pretty much every single mage in the game. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video, and let me know down in the comments below if you do agree with my list. There's a lot of champions in the A tier at the moment, a few champions in S, few champions in B and C, but I think that overall most mages are in a pretty decent spot right now, or in a pretty good spot, which is why you do see a lot of them in the A tier. I don't think there's too many mages right now that are just extremely OP. I think assassin meta right now is still the most popular, still the strongest for solo queue, so that's why you do see a lot of the mages in the A tier. But with that being said, guys, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.